welcome back here with us on Urban Debate on Mirror Now. It is day 9 of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. In the latest, Russia has warned its neighbors, asking them to not impose any sanctions on Russia. Constant explosions were heard across the capital city of Kyiv. In Ukraine, Russian forces have seized the largest nuclear plant of Ukraine. In fact, hours after fire broke out at the nuclear plant there following a Russian attack. The evacuation of Indians in Ukraine continues with full force. Over 10,800 students have been brought back to India through Operation Ganga so far. More flights will be operating to bring back other stranded Indian students. Our focus tonight is going to be about these Indian students who've been brought back. What happens next? Because they had to leave their colleges, they had to leave their education. We do not know for how long this war is going to really continue. This conflict between Russia and Ukraine is really continue. When actually they will be able to go back, nobody knows. So there is this shadow of uncertainty as far as their future is concerned. As we speak, we are getting to know that the government is considering some options to help these students. Government is likely to come up with some sort of a plan. But what are the options really given the current circumstances? Let's try and understand. We are joined by my guest this evening. We have with us Anil Swarup, former Education Secretary, Government of India, joining us. Furkan Kamar, who is former advisor, Education Planning Commission of India, also live with us this evening. We are joined by Professor J.S Rajput, former member, National Education Policy Making Committee and former director, NCERT. Thank you very much, all of you gentlemen, for joining us here on Urban Debate on Mirror Now. Mr. Anil Swarup, I want to begin the discussion with you. Out of about 20,000 Indian students who were studying in Ukraine, around 50% are back as per government's information. They're back in India. But the fact that they chose to study medicine in Ukraine and not in India says a lot about the state of medical education in our country. That's a larger issue, really. But I want to first understand from you what happens to them now as they are back. Some of them might be in their 3rd or 4th year. So could you just unmute yourself?
You are absolutely correct. I think, one, there is a larger issue of understanding why these children had to go abroad. There could be many reasons. Of course, there could be some who choose to become citizens of other countries because they are supposed to be very nationalist, but they choose to become citizens of other countries. Similarly, some children would want to go and study abroad because they think otherwise. But my understanding is that most of the children that went to Ukraine were those that couldn't get admission within the country. So that creates a different question altogether. So one is the long-term question of why and how to prevent such children or how to provide those facilities within the country. I'll briefly discuss that later on. But what do you do to the children who are already studying there? Now, it's a very, very tricky question because as the rules stand, if I understand them correctly, there is no way that you can get them admitted to, say, 3rd year, 4th year, or whichever year they were doing. They can't just be brought in and admitted in a college here. So the rules will have to be amended. That is one. Now, if the rules are going to be amended, then it will have to be seen whether this would be one-off or it would be a general rule created for such future eventualities. It is absolutely clear that this is a very unusual situation created much beyond the control of anyone. So I think the government will probably consider amendment to the rules, but that may not be very easy because what would then be the criteria for allowing these children to study in medical colleges here? First of all, you wouldn't have seats available in those medical colleges where they would go and study because all seats would be filled already. So they will have to create additional seats. Where would their seat be created? What would be the criteria of selecting these children there? Because you don't really know what is their competence level. So there will have to be some test to ascertain whether they are fit enough to go into that particular class, even if the rule is amended. So rule amendment, I think, would be the easiest thing to do. But the more difficult problem would be with regard to the operational part of it. There are a number of issues. In the beginning, I'm not outlining all those issues, but I think this is a very, very tricky situation and it would be difficult for them to be adjusted here, though I think the government should and probably will try and accommodate them here.
Okay. Professor Rajput, in your opinion, what really explains the exodus of students to medical colleges abroad, and what really happens to them now who are back? They are happy, they are relieved, at least they are back from Ukraine, but they're also worried because they do not know what will happen to them.
I think the first thing is, this is time for us to take immediate steps, start considering immediate steps to redress the miserable situation of medical education in India, which has led to these children going outside India. This is number one. Number two, this is an emergency situation, like Corona. We got Corona from our Hindi Chini Bhai, and now this is the blessing that we get from Russia. Emergency situation has to be addressed by emergency provisions. And these children are our children. They have got some education. All of them are not going to be admitted in one particular year, first year, second year, third year. That has to be ascertained, found out. And I, for one, would see that, yes, it should be a one-time affair. The government can certainly consider, in consultation with the Medical Council of India and also with the institutions, some of the major institutions, both private and public, whether they would be willing to accommodate them after ascertaining their suitability. Fee structures, etc., can be on par with what their parents are paying outside. But you cannot leave them to rush. These children have to be looked after. They have to be assured. Some of them would need a lot of guidance and counseling. And that has to be provided. All these arrangements, I'm sure government must be thinking on these lines. My suggestion would be that this issue should be discussed by experts in the area of medical sciences, and the bureaucracy should be asked to implement it, not to take decisions in that way as we have normally been accustomed to do, to take up. This, I am very clear about it. These children have to be looked after by the nation as we have looked after, and the corona victims, we have been able to solve that issue. We shall also be able to solve this issue. But the immediate thing is to provide them consultancies, assurances that they will not be left to lurch. The nation will look after them. Their parents will be asked to cooperate and collaborate. And medical institutions, wherever we have, some of them may like to go to other areas also, but they have those who have spent 4 years, 3, even 5 years, they would be useful to the nation, and they have to be looked after by the nation. This is what initially I would like to see.
Okay, interesting point there. This is an emergency situation. These children will have to be looked after by the government. Mr. Furkan Kamar, where do you stand on the current situation? How do you see the uncertainty which is there, which they are facing after coming back into the country?
Thank you for having me here. I think at the moment, all our focus should be on bringing these students back home safely. They are presently traumatized. They need to be given all assurances. And I think one of the assurances is that all possibilities are being explored to see that their education is not adversely affected. I would also like to put across a few points that I do not consider it as an exodus to do medical education. Within the country, we have approximately 90,000 intake to medical education. And annually, about 10,000 students go abroad to pursue medical education. Traditionally, they have been going to countries where the medical education was considered to be very reputed. And those are exempt and they can come back and start practice. Now, the new generation destinations that we are seeing in Ukraine is included in that. I mean, people go there for 2-3 reasons. One has already been mentioned, that perhaps they are not able to make it to the NEET cutoff to make it to the medical colleges within India. But I'm also aware that there are people who have made to the cutoff, but they are getting a seat in a private medical colleges. And these private medical colleges are at least 3 times more expensive than the education that you get in Armenia or in Ukraine or in the Russian Federation. So these students who may have got a seat in private medical college but chose to go abroad. Although when they are going abroad, they also take a lot of risk. And the issue of accommodating them in medical colleges in India is much more complex and complicated than it might appear. For example, during the past 6-7 years of which we have the data, these students who come back from these countries are required to take that foreign medical graduate examination. And the pass percentages have improved, but it has never been more than 23-24% of the people who appear. So there is a very real question that what is their quality, how can they be accommodated? And also, I think a knee-jerk reaction would not be needed. The issue needs to be deliberated. Like 2 years before, when the corona pandemic started, many students pursuing medical education in China, and that was a very larger number, much larger number. They came back to India, and so far they have not gone visa from China to go and pursue their education. I think there is some talk to do some kind of a mediation in that regards. Many went to Armenia, etc. So presently, I'll say that the issue is much more complex than it appears to be. Yes,
okay, but Mr. Anil Swarup, I was also looking at the data. Though Mr. Furkan Kamar doesn't want to really call it an exodus, but I was just going through the data from the website of National Medical Commission Act 2019 that replaced the Medical Council of India as the top regulatory body. It says that, there are 605 medical colleges in India right now with 90,825 MBBS seats a year. So actually, out of 16 aspirants, roughly one gets selected, and others have no option but to go out, and they prefer countries like Ukraine, Philippines, etc., where not just the education is cheaper, but they find it easier to also get into the colleges there. Don't you think that is something that also the government now must look at, given the current situation that we are in?
See, Mr. Furkan put it very correctly. I totally agree with him. This is a much more complex issue that cannot be resolved in a television debate or a television discussion. There are many aspects to it. You pointed out towards one aspect.
But we need bright minds like yours to, get some interesting ideas, because government is working on it. So we need solutions.
Let me give you some ideas as to how it can work. To begin with, what needs to be done is a combination of practitioners and experts. I use the word practitioners very essentially, because experts can give expertise, but someone has to put it into operation. So a group of practitioners and experts should sit together, identify the issues clearly, and I can identify the issues straight away. Number one, let us try and understand of why this exodus is happening. Why are the children taking admission abroad? Some of which were alluded to by Mr. Furkan. He made a very nice presentation. In fact, he explains why children are going abroad. Some of them are going abroad, as I said in the beginning, because they think that the education there is better. But that's a very small number. The larger number is those children who are going to countries like Armenia and Ukraine. These are the children who could get admission in India. Now, why didn't they get admission? Because first, the seats are limited. So if you're talking of 90,000, and if you can accommodate, say, like 120,000, then you have to have more medical colleges. So one immediate suggestion could be to set up more medical colleges. I'm only giving one by one. That is one. Number two, let us try and understand what is the present mechanism under which this NEET examination happens, and how and why are the private sector colleges are charging such stupendous fees that it is cheaper to go to Ukraine and get education than get educated in India. This is point number two. All these issues can be resolved. It's not that they can't be resolved, but we must clearly identify them. What we face today, a crisis, should be an opportunity to set right the ills that afflict this sector of medical education. It should be used as an opportunity. And that is why I suggest a group of experts and practitioners who are capable of delivering things on the ground, not merely giving ideas, because that's the easiest thing to do. someone who knows how to make it happen on the ground. These groups should sit down, identify these issues clearly. And as I said right in the beginning, we must understand the why of a problem. Why is a child leaving India to go abroad? And there are a number of reasons for it. Once you identify those, you will be able to find solutions.
Clearly, Mr. Furqan, one emerges as, the demand-supply mismatch that exists in the country. A few points that Mr. Swaroop made for our viewers just now, how, it's much cheaper, the medical education in countries like Ukraine. Or do you think that there is some failure of regulatory structure here that has also, in a way forced or pushed these medical aspirants to go abroad because they were not able to fulfill their dream here, the dream of becoming a doctor? Not everybody has got deep pockets in the country.
I would like to reiterate again that about 16 lakh candidates appear for UG NEET. Only 90,000 make it, and about 10,000 go abroad to all countries of the world, including Ukraine, Armenia, and so many other countries. So it's not an exodus. Until 2005, there were some issues, some problems, concerns about quality, and then this FMGE was invented to enable them to qualify those examinations and practice in the country. Now, coming to the present situations like those who were displaced because of the pandemic and could not continue, or the present Ukrainian crisis, and I hope and wish that the crisis ends soon, and God forbid if it spreads, there are close by countries where there are Indians in the Central Asia and the erstwhile Russian Federation. There could be many options that could be considered at this moment. Mr. Swaroop mentioned already a few. They are mostly a long-term kind of a solution that we create enough capacity. And I think there have been recently some movement in establishing more colleges. In the immediate term, a few possibilities could be explored, and individual students are also exploring those possibilities. Like some are already exploring possibilities to go to destinations like Egypt. Some of those displaced from China went to Armenia, and that is why I'm mentioning these examples. So within the country, we need to go case by case. We could find many who had qualified and had score to get admitted to private medical colleges, but they could not afford fees because that was in the range of about 50 lakhs or so, whereby in Armenia and other countries, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, etc., they were getting it for about 15 lakhs or 20 lakhs maximum. So those who had qualified needs and were eligible to get, I think there could be something done within the country. Otherwise, there could be some negotiation and some facilitations to accommodate these students to other countries, provided they are able to afford the cost. And of course, in the long run, whatever point Swaroop Saab had mentioned, I think that all need to be considered.
Okay. Now, one question to both of you, Professor Rajput and Mr. Anil Swaroop. Professor Rajput, to you first. Now, IMA has recommended the government to ensure that these students are accommodated in the Indian colleges right now. Do you think that's a feasible option, or do you think, some more brainstorming is required? Maybe that's not going to be the right way to go ahead, because then we have students from China as well, in a way facing a similar kind of a situation. Professor Rajput first, then Mr. Anil Swaroop.
No, a lot of brainstorming, ideation is necessary because you can't implement anything without the ideas, sound ideas which are implementable. And therefore, a lot of brainstorming, total study of the current situation that has arisen must be made to arrive at a decision. No decision can be taken in a hurry. This is number one. Number two, the conditions of medical education are already known to the government, to the institutions, and to the academics. They know it. And that is why the idea that the Prime Minister has thrown that every district will have a medical college. Now, this is the idea. It will take time. And it will depend upon the ingenuity of those who are interested to implement them, how much time it takes. Their skills will work. That is something which will now be expedited, and I think people will be more concerned and willing to implement that, and many things will be thought about it. It has already begun. The second thing, I would again repeat that the children, whether they have come from China, they have some training, they have to be adjusted, they have to be tested, they have to be evaluated, their skills have to be found out, and then a corresponding decision has to be taken. It will be a one-time decision. They have to be accommodated. It will not be quoted as a precedence. And maybe within a couple of years, we shall be in a position that we shall be enhancing our capacity, say from 90,000 to 120,000 or 130,000. Maybe these things will come down. So this is something this is the only way that one can think of at present. But yes, at present, these children who are in a terrible mental state, under tremendous stress and strain, you cannot say that we are not going to do anything for it. I don't think that would be a feasible and desirable state of affairs. We must look after them, ensure them that what suitability is, we'll look after them.
And I began my presentation.
Okay, Mr. Saru?
Yes, I began my presentation by saying that we have to split it into two parts. If you mix the two, we'll get confused. One is the immediate problem that we have as a consequence of this crisis, and the other is a long-term solution. And we'll be discussing the long-term solution. What is immediately required is how do we handle these children? And this can be done. It will not be easy, but it can be done. Number one, the existing rules will have to be amended. I think that would be the easiest part. Next would be to see which all medical colleges that they can be accommodated here or can be facilitated in other countries like Egypt. Now, this will have to be detailed out. Number three, how do you assess the capacity or capability of each child? You just can't pick up a child and say, you go to this medical college. Some test or examination will have to be done to see whether he or she is qualified to be admitted there. So on and so forth. You have to go step by step. For this, I hope they don't spend too much time in storming their brains. This has to be done forthwith in next couple of months, because then it will be too late for them. It should be done. And of course, brainstorming can happen for other issues of long-term issues. These issues are clearly visible. Sit down with the medical colleges, with the experts, and find a solution for these children because they need to be taken care of immediately. This is an immediate problem, can be sorted out. It will be tough, but government has managed to sort out much more complex issues earlier. I'm sure this will also be sorted out.
But definitely long-term solutions are also required, but immediate issue is what to do with these students. Mr. Furkan Kamar also wanted to come in. Yes.
I would just like to say that this is a humanitarian crisis and need to be approached with this angle. And therefore, everything that is possible that need to be done and all options need to be explored. But at the same time, we have to be very rationally thinking. For example, as of now, it might appear that it is a problem of about 20,000 students. But like last year, in the FMG examination, 2,700 graduates from Ukraine had appeared and only 600 had qualified. So seen from this perspective, perhaps the number is not very, very large. So I might also put on the table a possibility that those who are very close to their last years of medical education, they could be administered some kind of a test or the kind of test that they would have taken after completing their medical from Ukraine. And if they are able to make it and qualify it, then the deficit that is still remaining could be managed here within India. And the number would be less and it would be easier to accommodate.
How can we manage that deficit, and what happens to those graduates who actually fail to clear this particular exam that you're talking about, which they have to clear after they come to India?
No, there are many reasons, and as I said, that the issue is much more complex. There are issues of curricular compatibility. There are issues of the pedagogy. There are deficiencies in the graduates who come from these areas. They have to spend extra money for additional coaching to be able to qualify. So year-on-year basis, the backlog stays. So like out of 2,700 that appear.
Can they be subjected to the same sort of test this year as well, sir? That's what I want to understand. Because this time, it's an emergency situation. As Professor Rajput was mentioning, what you're telling us, the exam that they have to clear, which is foreign medical graduate exam to be able to practice medicine here, that happens under normal circumstances. But today, the situation is much different. So, simple question. Like I asked the other two guests, can they be accommodated the way they are in Indian colleges?
If you're talking about 20,000, no, it will be extremely difficult.
Yes.
If you have only 90,000 capacity, within that 90,000 capacity, you cannot accommodate. Even if you change the
Okay,
rule,
Mr. Anil Swarup also wanted to
teacher-student
respond very
ratio,
quickly, sir.
But yes, yes.
Sorry. You haven't understood what Mr. Furqan is saying. He's making a very pertinent point. Now, let us assume that of the 20,000, 10,000 are not capable of practicing. They're not qualified to be practicing. So until they get qualified, how do you accommodate them? You can't just admit them just because they were studying in Ukraine.
No, I'm talking about students who are in their, sorry to intervene, sir, but I'm talking about students, say, for example, who are in their third year, who are not close to getting the final degree. What do you do with those students? Where should they go? You cannot ask them to appear for this test.
No, not this test. Obviously, not the final test. There would be a different test to ascertain whether they're good enough to be qualified for third year. See, try and understand. Anyone who's done second year would have a different test as compared to who would have done third year. It's a question, it's an intermediate intervention. So you have to either make them qualified. If they don't qualify, how can you have an unqualified person just because he's coming from Ukraine to be admitted in fourth year after third year? So there has to be some test.
One more issue
and what I'm also trying to suggest here is...
Well, clearly, one thing is clear that it's a very, very tricky situation and it's not really going to be easy because there are too many layers here. It's quite complicated. I appreciate all my guests for joining us and helping us understand the issue. Also gave us some interesting ideas as well. We'll see eventually what the government does because these students really need help right now. With this, we will slip into a very, very short break, but there's lots lined up for you on the other side as well. Stay with us.